Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lisbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Lisbeth Meredith is an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and strivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
Hi, sisters and brothers. It's Lisbeth, and I forgot my microphone. It's what happens when I take a break from podcasting. I actually forget how to do it. I forget to turn off my air conditioning, to get the microphone ready, all the things. But boy, do I have a treat for you today. Today, I have for you Sarah Westbrook. Sarah felt that she was subjected to coercive control inside of her church that she grew up in. And she's written a book called Trauma Bonded, a story of navigating attachments forged by complex PTSD. Complex PTSD is when you have stuff happen and the people who, it's bad to have a trauma happen. But when people who are supposed to protect you and be your care providers are the ones at fault, it's complex PTSD, or they call it CPTSD. So anyway, I'm excited to have Sarah tell us about her experience growing up Mormon, frankly, and when it was she decided she had to leave for her well-being, and her family, her immediate family followed suit. So her husband, I mean. So anyway, excited to have Sarah here with us. Thanks as ever for being here. I hope you're enjoying your season. And I appreciate your likes, your shares, and your reviews. It just matters. To do this work and know that you appreciate it is everything. Thank you. Sarah Westbrook, thank you so much for being here today on Persistence U. And your story is positively fascinating. I gave just the tiniest little introduction, but can you let us know a little bit more about your story and when life changed forever for you?
Absolutely. So my story starts, like the background in my story or in my book, Trauma Bonded, is that you can see I'm being raised in a very fundamental religious space. So I was born and raised into the Mormon Church. I grew up in northeastern Arizona, where the majority of my community were also practicing Mormon. So everybody that I knew in my life was Mormon. The lady at the grocery store, the mailman, most of my teachers growing up were all Mormon. And so for me, it was a reality because I wasn't exposed to anything else. There was very little diversity in my upbringing. And my parents, who are both, have both been diagnosed with personality disorder, specifically narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, utilized the fundamental beliefs in an extra toxic way to control my behaviors growing up. And so that's really what shows up in my book is, I grew up in this way. This was the worldview that I had. And then when I got married, and as life started to occur, my husband joined the military. So suddenly I'm thrown into a world with vast diversity. And I loved it. And finding my place in that space was very exciting and challenging. And I thrived off of it. I love people. I'm an extroverted introvert, or maybe I'm an introverted extrovert. I'm very quiet until I get to know you. And then I'm just loud. And so I loved that community and that diversity. And as I continued to grow and mature, as I look back, I would say I kind of graduated from Mormonism. It's kind of this thing of I just outgrew it. I no longer needed it to feel whole. And so, yeah, then I left, and I can give you a little bit more detail if you'd like about where that shift. Is that what you're hoping for, Lisbeth?
Oh, I love your story, but were there things that in your religion that were definitely red flags for you that you thought as you experienced the broader world, you got away from everyone thinking the same and looking similar? Yeah. Were there red flags where you're like, I don't know about this for me anymore?
So I would say that in my early years, the biggest red flag was the doctrine of polygamy. So during my growing up years, Mormons did not practice polygamy. It was banned, it was outlawed. And if you had more than one wife, because that was the only option, we're not talking about polyamory or, all the other labels that go with that. We're talking about specifically more than one wife. All of that had been done away with the exception that we believed that in the next life, once we get to heaven, those who are righteous, in order to progress to become gods ourselves, we were going to be required to practice polygamy again, with the idea of we're supposed to populate worlds. And I believed this, but I hated it because I'm not good at sharing. I'm not good at sharing anything really. Like, if I just ask my kids, I don't like sharing my brownies. I don't want to give you a drink of my water. And I definitely don't want to share my husband.
Right.
And so this constant thought of, why are the rules different? And how am I ever going to do this? Like, I'm going to be the biggest pouty woman in heaven because I don't like it. But everybody around me was like, oh, you don't need to think about it. Don't worry about it. Like, that thought stuck, like, stuff it down. We'll understand it better when we get there. And we won't have that jealousy because it'll be heaven and it'll be perfect. And, you start doing the mathematics on how many humans, so in the Mormon belief system, for this world that we call Earth, we have the one God who apparently lived on a different Earth at some point, and he did good. And now he's married to multiple women in heaven. You think about how many people have ever been born into Earth ever, and they're all God's literal children. Well, how many wives does he need to populate this Earth? And how often are they pregnant? Because we were told that the way we get pregnant here is a type and a model for how we do it there. So still thinking, sex, pregnancy, big bellies, babies coming out. How many babies am I supposed to have? And so at some point I got to the place where I was like, Mormon heaven doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun for me. And that a lot of that comes because my husband and I are adoptive parents. We currently have 9 children that call us mom and dad. When I published the book, we had 7, and then we got 2 more. And we have several special needs children. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm exhausted. And just the thought of dying and going to heaven and doing this into perpetuity, like forever and ever, I'm going to have young children that need me, and I've got to teach them all of these things so that they can be prepared when it's their turn to make a choice, if they're going to, choose God's plan or the devil's plan. And I was just like, this is just overwhelming. Mormon heaven is just too much. And I think the other thing that really helped me escape Mormonism is actually my second born child. So my husband and I struggled with infertility for many, many years. And in my Mormon upbringing, my purpose, the female's purpose in Mormon upbringing, is to get married young, have a million kids, be a stay-at-home mom, and that's it. They didn't talk to you about getting a career. It was actually discouraged. And if I had to get a career, I should choose teaching elementary school because then my schedule is the same as my children's. And while a lot of that advice, like, if you love teaching, then go teach. And one of the perks is you get several weeks off in the summer. Yay. Awesome. Teachers make up all those hours they get off in the summer during the school year. Like, they work hard. That's where your passion is. Great. Go do it. If that's what works for you, great. Go do it. If I had had my choice of what I wanted to be, I probably would have been a surgeon or a doctor. I love medicine. And that wasn't in the cards for me. But, long story short, my second son, who is adopted. So my husband and I turned to adoption. We struggle with infertility, but in order to meet that Mormon expectation that I should be a parent. So I got married 6 weeks after I turned, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something in there. Within 3 months, I turned 18 the end of March, and I got married the following June, the very beginning of June. My husband and I just celebrated 25 years anniversary. He's a great guy. But the expectation was, you're married, they'll get pregnant. Like, now go get pregnant. We stopped using birth control at 3 months into the relationship, and I wasn't getting pregnant. My infertility doctor, after the couple of years that we had tried to get pregnant, basically told us that our next option was in vitro fertilization, which at the time was costing, I don't even remember, around 20 grand. It was crazy expensive. None of it was covered by insurance. And it was still in its beginning phases. We're talking 25 years ago. It was nowhere near as advanced as it is now. Spoiler alert, I did eventually get pregnant. We have 3 biological children. But I got pregnant because medical science advanced, and my insurance, TRICARE, because my husband joined the military, paid for it. So we could afford it. So my husband and I were kind of looking at our options, and we were like, we can spend 20 grand on adoption and end up with the baby, or we can spend 20 grand on in vitro and my body might not take it. And they're already telling me that, it's going to be a high risk pregnancy and my chances are very high for miscarriage and so on and so forth. So we chose the adoption route. We adopted our first child. If you were to read So What to Expect the First Year, they've got the what to expect when you're expecting, what to expect the first year. My oldest, Eric, was textbook. He is the most calm, laid back, go with the flow. I think he had 2 terrible tantrums when he was
Wow.
He was the easiest kid ever, which meant that I could give all kinds of unsolicited advice about what an awesome parent I was, because I was obviously doing it right. Because in Mormonism, the observable outcome indicates your righteousness, your knowledge, your expertise. So I grew up in a world where if people thought I was perfect, it must mean I'm perfect. And then that was expanded on by my narcissistic father, who only loved me and demonstrated that love and was proud of me if I was the absolute best at something. So I started playing the flute when I was in the summer of my 4th grade year. I sat first chair after the first couple of months of playing. We would audition. I sat first chair. I was the best flautist in my school district all the way until I graduated from high school. And it wasn't because I just loved the flute and loved to practice. It was because if I went down to second chair, my father would no longer brag about me. There would no longer be Sarah on this pedestal. And there was so much competition in my home. And I grew up with this. And this is drilled into Mormons so strongly. The higher up your position is that you serve, which service means you're voluntold and you accept it and you do it and you don't make money doing this. And it's my husband served as the bishop. It was a second full-time job. He never made a dime from the church for that. And it put a lot of strain on our relationship because he was never home.
Right.
He was, army doctor and bishop, and very dedicated to that religion. And so we adopted Eric. Eric was the easiest textbook kiddo. I took that to mean I was an amazing mother, and not that that's just his personality and I got lucky. And he is an amazing kid. Absolutely love the boy. He's all grown up now. And then, I used to joke that, and then God gave me Brig. And Brig, my second son, we didn't know it at the time, but he had pediatric onset schizophrenia.
Wow.
He was allergic to everything. And he was the most colicky baby I've ever had. He only slept 3 hours as a newborn a day. And the rest of the day he screamed. And he did that until he was 5 or 6. He did not sleep through the night until he was 6, 7 years old. And we had started him on antipsychotics. I don't know when the hallucinations started for sure, but he was diagnosed with severe psychosis, auditory and tactile hallucinations right before his 5th birthday.
Oh my goodness.
I would take him to the grocery store and he'd be screaming the whole time and people would look at us and it made people uncomfortable. He would walk down the grocery store aisle and he would stick his hand in the cans, the green beans and the vegetable cans, and we would just walk through and he'd knock them off the shelf. Then, it was the most embarrassing. He would go potty and he would take his poop out of the toilet and draw poop murals all over our walls. And then he picked his skin off constantly because he felt like things were crawling on him. So he had like always on antibiotics, always at the doctor's office and in public. It was really hard. And I'm grateful I had a counselor at the time. So if you read the book, you learn that I cheated on my husband right before Brig joined our family. That's part of the trauma bond in the book, Trauma Bonded. So that's what the story's about. Spoiler alert, I cheated on my husband. And I was in counseling because I'm not a cheater. And I needed to understand what happened there. It caught me off guard that I would have walked into that extramarital affair, especially with how I felt about polygamy and sharing. It just didn't match who I felt I was at my core. And that counselor ended up spending more time with me on learning how to not care what other people think and to stop lying so that I could cover up all of my mistakes and just be me. And that, I think, was really the catalyst for eventually, how many years later, 16 years later, walking away from the Mormon Church. Because first I had to break the expectation of always being perfect. We would go to church and I put on a whole new Sarah in order to, I've got things together. My life is not falling apart. Look at how amazing I am. I'm raising all of these kids. So like right now of my 9, I've got 4 that have significant special needs. 2 that will probably never, 1 we already know, Brig, the one with schizophrenia. My husband and I have permanent guardianship for him. He has already been deemed permanently disabled. And then my 10-year-old who has severe autism is most likely going to have the same fate, where my husband and I take care of them into their adulthood because that's the level of special need that they have. And learning to not care anymore what other people thought of me. Number 1, it took about a decade to where I could honestly say, yeah, I don't care what you think of me. This is how it is. And then the second piece was learning boundaries and learning that it was okay to say no. And that, even like we were taught, if the bishop comes and gives you one of those voluntold positions in the church, which we call callings, because we literally believed that God spoke to the bishop and said, Sarah Westbrook is the person you want to lead your youth program for girls. Like she's the one. And it didn't matter that my husband was deployed to Afghanistan fighting a war, or that I was raising all these special needs children, or that I had just opened my own private practice as a mental health counselor. None of that mattered because it was for Sarah. And I would go in and instead of saying, you know what, I think I've got enough on my plate right now. Thanks, but no thanks. If I had said that, I would be sinning. I would be evil. I would be looked down on. And it would mean that I wasn't as righteous. And therefore, I wasn't worthy of God's love, and God would not be happy with me. And so the Mormon Church placed me in a position. And I think one of the reasons my dad got away with as much as he did into my adult years, for more information, go read the book. But I think the reason that my dad got away with it was because in Mormonism, that's who God was. In Mormonism, the Mormon God is very narcissistic. If you don't do it the way he wants, love is withdrawn, acceptance is withdrawn. And they'll tell you all day long, no, God doesn't withdraw his love. But the way to punish you if you make mistakes is isolation and separation from the community. If you can't be rescued, well, then we've got to get away from you because you've got apostate blood or whatever. And so even though one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life was raise a child with schizophrenia, pediatric onset schizophrenia. And it has almost broken me mentally and physically many, many times. He is the reason that I was able to find my freedom outside of the cult. And I 100% believe that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church, is absolutely a cult. It fits the diagnostic criteria. Being on the thinking in, you see it a lot more clearly. Right. Yeah, it's a cult.
you are a clinician, and I know, we have LDS listeners. I certainly welcome them. And this is, your perspective, but I feel like there's a lot of information you have because of your education and your experience. So explain, because a lot of times we get confused. What really is a cult and how does it fit?
Yeah, sure. So just for clarification for your listeners, I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have a license to practice in multiple states here in the United States because my husband's military. So anywhere we would go, I'd get another license in order to keep.
Love it.
And I went into that field because nobody had answers for what was going on with my son. And because my husband was military, I was like, he could die and I need to have a backup plan. Like literally,
Right.
it was, he could die. Let me have a backup plan. And that's how I kind of stumbled into my behavioral health, mental health career. When we're looking at the diagnostics for a cult, I definitely recommend looking at Stephen Hassan's work, the BITE model for sure. But he also has on his website, and I don't have it right here, Rohan, he has a little chart with the BITE model where not only does he talk about behavioral control, information control. Let's see, the T is, oh goodness, behavioral information, thought control. There it is, thought control. And then the E is, I want to say educational, and that's not it. Can't remember it right now. It's just completely slipped my mind. But the BITE model is the diagnostic criteria that we look at. So I would definitely look at Stephen Hassan's. I would look at his BITE model chart. It's like a little infographic. It's broken into 4 little squares, and it gives you each of those areas and then examples of those areas. And so places where the Mormon Church, we'll just talk about, behavioral control. That is, you have to behave in a certain way to be accepted into our community as a fully fledged, dedicated member. And if you're not behaving in this way, we need to fix it. We need to find a solution that fits within our narrative. And if you still don't behave in a certain way, we're going to proceed with caution in the way that we interact with you, accept you, those types of things. Your information control, the easiest way to demonstrate Mormons on the information control is that we are discouraged at looking at any information about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints unless it is published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So
Wow.
one of my shelf breakers in Mormonism is I went through, behavioral health is trying very hard to have the same type of hard science studies as, studying antibiotics and other areas of the medical field. And we've made a great deal of progress in, fine-tuning our evidence-based treatment to be more of a hard science than a soft science. We're not 100% there, but we are vastly better than we were 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Freud is a thing of the past. We study him for appreciation of, our history.
Right.
The guy was wacky. But anyway, we, that information for everything that I did in college was, you want to look at the peer-reviewed studies. You want to look at studies that have a different opinion. You want to test it yourself. You want all of the information you can possibly gather to then make an informed decision. And so in the Mormon Church, it always bothered me. Once I started college, and I was like, oh, this is the scientific method. I get this. I'm not allowed to look at anything about the church, not websites, not books, not publications. It is very much like when I started questioning Mormonism, I actually was like, I can't do this anymore, and stepped away because I was like, the culture's toxic and I need a break. That was my first, the culture's toxic, I need a break. And then I had a client actually say, I won't see you unless you read this and demonstrate that you can be empathetic to me because I believe this is true and it's against the church. And it was something called the CES letter, which started out as a PDF file. And now it's a, little book, probably about 80, 90 pages. I don't know. I'd have to look at it to tell you how long it is. But it is all of this hard evidence, tangible evidence, like you can hold it, you can see it, you can look at the images as to why, and all of these holes in Mormon doctrine, who the leaders were, who the founders were actually, what was, so things like I had no idea that Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, was marrying minors under coercion. No idea. No idea at all. That really bothered me because I've worked with sex trafficking victims. Like, I am very aware of what that looks like. And as I'm looking at this polyamory and polygamy that is happening with the founders, and not just Joseph Smith, but then all the next prophets, I'm going, ew, gross. I'm not okay with this. God would not ask. If there is a God, he wouldn't ask these men who are taking advantage of minors in a sexually explicit way. And a lot of Mormons will say, but he didn't have sex with those minors. And I say, he changed their lives in a way that they didn't get to grow up for normal, healthy human development.
It seems like no choice. Like the choices of women, it seems like, from what you're saying, are very, very compromised. Young girls and women.
And members today would say, no, that's not the case. We have all these things. Like, we just had one of the top leaders in Mormonism just came out and said, Mormon women have more privileges than any other in this religion, in Mormonism, than any other religion in the world. And I was like, are you kidding? You just said that out loud, right? Because I don't think so. You obviously haven't experienced very many religions. Sounds like you've experienced Mormonism, and you're saying that because that's what the men say. They're like, oh, look, we give you all these things. Okay, great. You get to do all these things in your church, but I've served in leadership.
Right.
And I can present ideas. And any man in the room could have said, now we're not doing it that way. And all of my authority, all of my power, all of my rights as a female, they're all gone. Everything has to be approved of by a man. That's not real power or authority. Right. And when we talk about like what Joseph Smith was doing with these minors, he was telling them, if you don't marry me, the Lord is going to come down and I'm going to die and I'm going to be cursed. And this is a revelation I'm having. And if you do marry me, you and your family are guaranteed a spot in the highest degree of glory with God. And the other piece that really bothered me as I'm reading this is that Mormons teach, and I love this teaching in Mormonism, Mormons teach that the greatest gift that we have in this life that God will never mess with is our ability to choose for ourselves. We call it free agency. A lot of other churches call it free will. That is what God has given us, and he won't mess with it. And my thought is, well, then what about the 14-year-old girls?
Right.
That wasn't free will. That was coercion. Like, if you don't marry me, I'm going to die. Your family's going to be cursed. But if you do, we all go to heaven and live happily ever after. As a 14-year-old development, like I'm looking at my daughter who's 14 and I'm going, One of the things that was interesting is when my daughter was 14, my brother-in-law was 32, I think. So around the same ages that Joseph Smith is marrying this 14-year-old. And I remember walking in, my daughter it was a couple weeks before she was 15, because the church likes to say she was almost 15. Okay, great. She's 14. Thank you. So my daughter's about 14 and a half. And I walked in and I said, hey, you know what? Your brother Kenyon could marry Katie. If Kenyon was Joseph Smith and Katie was Helen Mar Kimball, they'd be married right now. My husband flew off the handle. That's disgusting. That's inappropriate. And I was like, yes, it is. It's so bad. And and if she marries your brother, then y'all get to go to heaven. And if she doesn't, we're all doomed to hell. It was like this eye-opening, like, this is in real context now. And I think one of the reasons the Mormon Church controls that information is so that we don't think about it differently. And that's a huge sign of the cult. Like, a cult is going to say we are the experts on everything. Thought control. The Mormons are like, if you even begin to think about something different, you need to Stop that. They also, you could also say with the T could also be time control. Like they are so busy. I look at so many. So I've left Mormonism. My husband is now left. My kids are all out. We are all very happy out. And many of our friends are still genuine friends. We hardly ever talk to them because the only time we saw them was at church activities. And they are so damn busy. They don't have time to stop and sit and relax. Everything about their environment is controlled. And why can I not remember what the E is for? I'd have to look it up.
Okay, well, do you send it to me after this? And by the way, I do want it. We're running out of time. I want to get to your book ever so quickly because when did you know you wanted to write it? I mean, you've had quite an experience.
So I always wanted to write it. I was like, as I healed, I knew that, and with my education, I knew that people learn best through relatable stories. And so I knew I needed to share it. And in the beginning, I was like, I'm not sharing this until my dad is dead. It'll mess up my whole family if I write the book before. And then my dad did to my daughters what he had done to me. In that, just that horrible emotional abuse, like you have to do it my way. I'm the only one that's right. And it was about silly things. So he spoiler alert, he bloodied my then 4 or 5-year-old autistic daughter's lip because she ate a potato chip in his living room. And it was violent, it was aggressive, and it wouldn't have stopped with the bloody lip if I hadn't been right there and screamed at him, stop manhandling my daughter. So I'm gonna call it when in the great big scheme of abusive or inappropriate things done to children. On that spectrum, we're on the mild end, but we are absolutely in the territory of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other daughter, who's older, she'll be 16 on Thursday, like we're recording this. So she'll be 16 on Thursday, so in a couple of days. Here, she wore a T-shirt, and at the bottom of the T-shirt, the bottom hemline, it had a whole bunch of tulle, like her little ballerina tulle. It was so ugly, and she wore it with clothes that didn't match. She was an eyesore, but she was confident in it. And as a mama, I've never cared what my kids wear, not after Eric. Like after Eric, I gave up on that. I was too busy cleaning up murals on the wall from the schizophrenic kid to give a crap. As long as your body is covered and you're not going out in your undies, wear whatever you want. I had to let a lot of that, those expectations, and then the judgment that came from, oh, your kid does not match. And my daughter has always been a loud dresser. And so she was in Phoenix, which is near where my parents live. She was staying with my parents. They were supposed to take her to the aquarium. And my father lectured her for over 2 hours because he wanted her to change her clothes because people will look at her funny and then men will get the wrong idea. They want you to men are going to look at you and take advantage of you because you're wearing this shirt. That's a very common theme in Mormonism and in society for many, many years, that if a woman doesn't dress a certain way, men can do whatever they want and it's the woman's fault. That's very much Mormon teaching. They're not going to put it as bluntly as I just did, but I have to dress a certain way in order to make sure the man doesn't have a hard time with his thoughts and sexual urges. And when he lectured her for that long and my mom did nothing, and then, a few months later, he bloodies my daughter's lip, I called him out and said, you can't be around my kids without supervision. And he didn't handle that very well. Fast forward a couple of years and I cut contact. And once I was able to break that trauma bond, like I truly broke that trauma bond, finally, I was like, okay, it's time to write my book. The truth is the truth. I don't care who doesn't believe it. I don't care what my father says or does. I'm okay now. It is okay for me to share my story. And so I did. And that's when I wrote. And that's actually where I got the title is Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD. We explore in the book my attachment to my husband and how that was influenced, my attachment to the affair partner and how that was influenced, and the relationship between my father and myself and my mother and myself. Those are the 4 relationships that really get explored and kind of dissected in the book about how the trauma impacted my ability to be my authentic self, how I was able to find my voice, and how I was able to heal and break generational cycles of abuse. Because my goal as a mama was to not do it like my parents did. And I would say that I've accomplished that goal in some ways, in amazing ways, and in others, my kids are going to need therapy for.
Right. And that's all of us. That is all of us.
All of us.
So where can people learn more about your book, maybe get it? Tell us what the best contact mechanism is that people can reach out to you, because you have other writings coming up. You have another book coming.
I do. I'm working on a book called Raising Crazy, Growing Up to Show Up, where we really dig into raising a child with schizophrenia. And my son is helping me co-write that, the one with the schizophrenia. So you can find out more about my works at daisygirlcommunications.com. That is my website. It's also the publishing company that the book has been published under. So that's Daisy Girl Communications, plural with an S.com. You can email me at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. You can find the book. You can buy a paperback book. And I believe the digital version, anywhere that books are sold, I believe the digital version is on most platforms now as well. The paper or hardback copies are sold anywhere books are sold. And then the audiobook is exclusive to Audible. Okay. And I did read that myself. So I poured my soul into reading it myself. I did my best to represent each character the way that they showed up. It was an emotionally grueling and re-traumatizing experience. I'm really glad to have gone right back into therapy as soon as I was done with the audiobook. But I am very proud of that audiobook.
That's a huge feat. I mean, congratulations. And if those who are watching on YouTube can see behind you that you have a beautiful book cover. And, it's not easy especially to publish a memoir, much less a very, very large memoir, but it's perfect. I love the cover, and that's a lot of work. And thank you so much for being here on Persistency with Elizabeth. I cannot tell you how interesting it's been, but also a real great learning experience. I think we all need to look at how we're making decisions and what's influencing us, and are we allowed to be our true self in the spaces where we congregate in our faith communities as well, at home, in faith communities everywhere. And if not, really look at what are our choices, where do we get support, and how do we find community as we make other choices.
Right. And I would add that I would grow that. That's beautiful, but just grow it a little bit and say why. Like, not the what's wrong with you, why, but the what is getting in the way of me being able to do that. Because it might be something within you. It might be, a trigger or a teaching or something that we've got to challenge. That doesn't necessarily mean, you don't need to necessarily leave that community.
Right.
But if the answer is it's something in the community that is stopping me, well, now it's time to evaluate. Do I need a change of environment to continue to grow? It is okay to be transplanted. It's okay to be fertilized, and it's okay to grow in rocky soil. But you've really got to figure out what the barrier is to your ability to grow. So be honest with yourself. And then, as always, if you're struggling with mental health stuff, find a professional or text or call 988. I've had to do that. I've used the National Suicide hotline before because I was just not having a good day around the time I did my book. They were amazing. So please utilize those sources. If me as a mental health counselor has a bad day, I know all of the skills and tricks in the book from all my education if I have to dial that 988. So do you sometimes. So please use it. It's there. You're loved, you're valued, and eating you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate this. I loved that interview. She had a lot of great things to say. Like Sarah said, sometimes people feel controlled or coerced in a relationship or in a faith community. But if one suspects that they're in a faith community or in a relationship that does not allow for freedom of expression, freedom of thought, appreciation of diversity and gets very threatened if somebody different is in this person's life and who thinks differently. That's something to look at. Those are some red flags. So I thought she just did an amazing job, knocked it out of the park, breaking it down as to why it was important for her to leave. Always good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. And in my own writing world, I am put a couple of things on pause while I went to family reunion, while I went to Crime Con and worked some of my writing contracts. So now I need to return to my 2 concurrent projects, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Have a great one. Thanks again.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lisbeth.